This is the chassis of a Cybex Priam, and today we are going to do a full disassembly of the telescopic system as well as the folding system in order to show you how it's supposed to function so that you can troubleshoot problems you might have. The problems that essentially would be dealt with then with this would be either telescopic issues based on the handle not locking into various places, or the opposite problem, that the handle will not become unlocked from various positions. The second issues would have to do with the rear frame, which has to do with the overall fold, because the fold beyond the telescopic handle is just a releasing of the rear frame. When you press this all the way in, the rear frame then slides first into the standing fold position, and then you can press it a bit more into the full fold position. So with the rear frame, the issues that would be dealt with then would be either the rear frame does not unlock and fold in towards the front frame, or conversely, it won't lock into the fully open position. Yeah? So in order to explain these problems, we're going to take apart both of these systems, show you all of the components, how it's supposed to function. In most cases, fixing this is just going to be a matter of things having gotten out of alignment, so taking it apart, oiling the various components, and then putting it back together tightly and in the proper alignment will fix it. But of course, there's always a possibility that components have become damaged, in particular when it comes to that telescopic system. Overall, the telescopic system is highly complex and composed of a lot of plastic. The folding system, by contrast, is mostly metal, very robust and very simple. In that case, there are some metal components that might also, of course, have become damaged, become bent, or even have worn down a bit and stuff. But we'll get down there and show you what there is, and then we can discuss some possibilities. In some cases, you might, though, of course, need to get a hold of parts. So, in any case, let's get started then. First thing we're going to do is to remove the entire handle. This is so that we can deal with the handle-based telescopic elements separately afterwards. We're going to start with the folding elements, and also this handle holds all of these components, the folding elements, together, so you do have to remove that even if you're dealing with folding issues. Again, the back frame. So in order to remove the handle, first thing you want to do, slide over that slider, pull in the main button, and push the handle down through. And then at the bottom are these stoppers that have these feet. These feet go up into channels here and then hold the handle in place. We have to remove those stoppers so that we can pull out the entire handle. Okay, I've already removed mine a few times, so yours might be a little bit more difficult. What you might want to do in order to make it easier to remove those stoppers, take a little bit of WD-40 and spray into that crack and around those buttons, and allow it to kind of work its way in here. You can put the chassis on its back, allow that WD-40 to work in, and it'll create a little bit of lubrication between those components. And then this stopper is essentially held in place by two buttons, one on either side. They're these round circles, and they need to be pressed in and then the stopper pushed out, right? So take a small flathead screwdriver, and I'm probably going to block it as I do it, which I don't want to, but you want to press in this button and then press the flathead screwdriver in above the button, and then press down a little bit. And now you can see that that button is depressed. That means that the lip of the button has gotten down into that channel. You're going to do the same thing on the other side. And it's going to be a little bit harder because the thing has already started to pop out a bit. But you got to get both buttons in, pressed in. There we go. And then we can start working this out. Once you've gotten it a little ways, you can see that the stopper has started to come out, and there is just the way that stopper is made with the plastic. You can now get your small flathead screwdriver in there, into that little divot. You can start to pull it out. So that's what it looks like, right? It just has these two buttons that go into those holes there and hold it in place. Okay, gonna do the other side. All right, once you've pulled out those two stoppers, you can pull over that safety slider, push in that main button, and pull the handle, and the handle will come all the way out. Going to set the handle aside, and we're going to take apart that central locking mechanism, which releases and locks that rear frame. So, in order to do that, there are two screws. one here, and one here. The one here has a nut on the bottom, so you're going to need a wrench to hold that nut. And on mine, this was very tight the first time. You can spray a little bit of WD-40 down into that nut where the screw goes in, right? And that might help a bit. Otherwise, it's just about having the right screwdriver and the right wrench. Probably better to use a non-electrical screwdriver. I'm just doing that because I've done mine already and it opened. The first time I used a handheld, because otherwise you might just wind up stripping out that screw, right? So there you go, screw in a nut. Then this other one is a little bit odd. The threading is at the top and then it's a long pin under that. And start unscrewing it. But once you get past that threading, there's no traction. You're going to have to help it along to pull it out. Looks like this. All right. This then allows you to pull off that first disc. And we can essentially see the whole mechanism now for the actual locking and releasing of the rear frame. There's another mechanism that's contained in here I'll briefly cover since we're disassembling anyway, but this is the main area of interest. So what happens is, when I press down that handle, it presses in on this mechanism here. And this is a very simple mechanism. It's a metal piece that runs down and connects to this peg. This peg is spring-loaded, it presses down, and when that peg presses down, that peg moves then from this little spot here down into the track where it can slide. Yeah? And that when it gets into that track that can slide, it can then rotate, and the rear frame rotates in towards the front. Yeah? So this one's of course still locked in place. I just activate that mechanism, and you can see that this no longer is there. It goes straight into that standing fold position without trouble. If I push this in then, that's the lock position. Press that down, it releases that pin and it allows it to slide in that track, releasing the rear frame. Okay? So in most cases, this might have gotten out of alignment. This track, the lip on this track, might be bent. You might need to bend it back into place. Do some lubrication, make sure that everything's all tight there. Worst case scenario, you might have alignment issues or bending or breaking in this part. Now, this is very simple inside. It's just this one metal piece and a spring, so I'm not actually going to drill out the rivets, which would be necessary in order to open this. In most cases, this won't be the cause of an issue if you're having trouble with that rear frame releasing or not locking into place. But if it is, I'll show you how to get at the point where you would drill out those rivets, and then you can look inside and put that spring back in position. Be very simple. There's no need to do it right now. So if you turn this over, look at it from the side, follow this arm down, take your small flathead screwdriver, pop it in here right under this cap. You'll get at the bottom tooth. There are 3 teeth. See, 1 and then 2 facing upwards. And this then shows you these 2 rivets and these 2 screws. Unscrew the 2 screws, drill out the 2 rivets, and that'll release then this metal plate, and you can get at that mechanism more. All right? Okay, so that's the main locking and unlocking of the rear frame. There is a second mechanism here, which has to do with this sort of middle position between the standing fold, the open position, and the full fold. And it's not a position that locks fully into place, it just holds in place. And I'll just show you that real quick because it is spring loaded, so there's a chance it could have alignment issues. I haven't heard about any sort of alignment issues here, but while we're opening it up anyway, might as well show you. You can fast forward if you have no issues with this and no desire to see. But if you remove these 4 screws, all right, after removing those screws then, you can just pop off this panel. And you can see inside here, there's this spring that just presses this triangular shape down into a divot here on the rear frame. And that divot is angled so that you can press it past the point at which that triangle is holding it in place. And that's why it's not a full lock. It even has like a wheel on it. It's just meant to allow for enough of a lock for it to hold in that standing fold position. So, very simple mechanism, most likely nothing going wrong, but that's how it functions. I'm just going to put it back together real quick. Go. Okay, we're now just going to set all of this aside as far as the folding mechanism is concerned, because we're going to move over to the telescopic functions, and part of the telescopic mechanism is contained within this piece, so we can't put it back yet. So, set this aside. I'm going to deal with the handle and this portion of the arm. Alright, so when you're having trouble with the telescopic elements, either the handle won't stay up and locked into place or won't unlock, then you have three different sort of elements or areas that this can be related to. So you have this central activation system, right? And then there are two cables that run down, and these two cables, like one on each side, are going to deal with all of these metal pieces that pop out. So when I pull that slider and pull on that button, you can see all those metal pieces just popping in. So you can have trouble where that wire is connected to the central activation. You can have the wire breaking. You can have trouble where the wire is connecting to the elements that house those three buttons. That's also possible. Or you can have trouble with the points where those buttons lock into places inside this element. Yeah? If you're having trouble with, let's start with the beginning then. If you can pull in those buttons and you see all three of those moving, then you know your wires are in order. And if you look on both sides and you see they're the same, like these metal pieces aren't worn down, all these buttons pop entirely out, then you know your trouble isn't actually in the handle. As long as all three of those are moving, all of them look like they pop out as much as they should, looking at both sides, then you know your trouble isn't in the handle, and your trouble is then instead in the places where those metal pegs lock in place here. We're going to deal with this piece first, and then we'll go on to the disassembly of the handle. Disassembly of the handle is quite intense in a way. So, when those pegs lock into various positions, or in use terms, when you have different positions of your handle, you're trying to lock it upwards or at different heights, that peg or those pegs are locking here inside the sleeve that's inside this part. It's actually only one of these pegs involved there, is this one, yeah? The square one, not the triangle ones. In order then to get at the piece which houses the wells where those pegs go, you're going to need to then remove this sleeve. Alright, removing this sleeve is going to be accomplished essentially the same way as that the plug that was on the arms. So you have, again, these buttons. You have one here, and you have one here. Yeah? So we're going to do the same thing and take our flathead screwdriver. You might want to spray a little bit of WD-40 in there again ahead of time. Take your flathead screwdriver, and press in, push down a little bit so that that button is started. Same thing on the other side, other button. Again, when you get it in enough, you can kind of pull in on this sleeve. Pull it off. Okay, there it goes. Moving back again real quick to that central locking, just show you that button that presses down and releases that peg. Central locking again is pressing on this long metal piece, yeah? Like that. So if you're having trouble with that central area not unlocking, it can also be the interaction between this black plastic button piece and this metal thing. It's another thing just to check out that nothing has snapped or worn down. Okay, back to the telescopic element then. Where that handle peg is locking into place is these rectangular holes. So if you don't have trouble with the handle itself or with the peg, most likely the trouble has to do with where that peg slots then into these rectangular areas, that they have snapped or that they have worn down. If that has happened, I'm not really 100% sure what a regular person would do about it, unfortunately. If you're handy with a Dremel, then you can try to Dremel it down flat again if it's worn down at an angle so that that peg is sliding out. If you're handy with putting extra plastic inside or metal or something, essentially what you have to do is to get that rectangular area tight again and flat so that it holds that peg in place. You can of course also take this component to a 3D printing place and see if they can print it for you. It's not tremendously complex on the inside. There is a little bit of like angles and so on, but it's not much. So chances are that a good 3D printing place might be able to print you off a piece, assuming again that you can't get parts from Cybex. I'm pretty sure they won't provide you with any of these parts. But 3D printing place might, or if you're handy with a Dremel or you know somebody who is, you can come up with some kind of a MacGyver fix if your issue is in these rectangular holes. That's the best I can do if that turns out to be the case for you. All right, let's move on to the handle though and look at happier possibilities that it has to do with misalignment with those handle components. Popping this back in place then, just a matter of lining up that metal piece into that track, pressing it down, and when you get to that button, of course pushing it in, it goes in, gets the other button, and press it in. And sliding the whole thing back into place until those buttons pop out. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is open up this activation mechanism at the top. This handle is upside down. On the other side is the Cybex logo. On the underside then are 4 screws. And we are going to open up those screws, and there are spring-loaded things inside that are going to pop. So maybe hold it a little bit so it isn't a crazy popping. When working with this mechanism, it is easiest with that logo down. I'll show you during reassembly. It'll kind of hold the pieces in place a little bit better. Taking off the lower panel then, and you have stuff inside. So you have your button, yeah, and then we're going to start sliding off this lower panel. You have this sliding safety piece here, and that has a small spring that's attached to that and also goes under and into this hole. Yeah. And then on the other side, you have the 2 wires. So as this button presses in, you can see it's triangular. It's going to push this piece this way, which is then going to pull the wire that way, and push this piece that way, which is going to pull on this wire. So first thing to examine then is that these wires are intact, that these pieces are intact, that the wire hasn't broken the piece because of misalignment and so on. And then we can take these pieces off. If you look at all of these pieces, see that everything's in order. If you didn't have trouble with activating that part of the mechanism at first, then we're going to move down and look at those pegs. So we're going to do that on one side. In order to do that, we're going to remove the wire from the piece. I'm going to pull it up and out like that. And now it's detached. So we're going to do this side, and we're going to have a look at all of these buttons. So these buttons aren't popping out. They could have come into misalignment. If you notice that one is worn down and you need to get somebody to manufacture the small component, these are all separate components inside one very large plastic piece, as I'll show you in a moment. That is how you would swap out any of those components. So now what we need to do is to remove this large internal plastic element here, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so in this case then we have 1, 2, 3 metal buttons that pop out, and in addition to that, we have one of those little circular like buttons for the plugs. Yeah, and all of this is one large rectangular plastic assembly inside here that we're going to have to slide out, that's attached to the wire and houses all of those buttons. What we're going to need to do then is to press these buttons in and use our small screwdriver, this button and those 3 metal buttons, to start to pull the thing down towards the end. So if all of them aren't pressed in at the same time, in a way it won't work, but you can get them a little bit so that they'll hold off of that lip. Push it down in a little bit, and then it doesn't pop back out, so we know that it's gone down under that lip. Get that one too. And then this plastic button. There. There. That last one is angled downward, so it's a little bit easier. There, it started to move. Once it started to move, you're going to take that flathead screwdriver and you're just going to use those holes and start pulling it down, and you're going to probably do some small divots into the plastic in there, but it's not a piece that shows. So as long as you're not too brutal with it, it's okay that it has some small pressure places, shall we say, small scratches and so on inside there. And you're going to start working it downwards wherever you can using those holes and your flathead screwdriver. There, starting to pop out the bottom. And then as you get it to the end, these buttons are all going to start popping out into the various holes. You just got to push them down, kind of like whack-a-mole, till you get the whole piece out. And this might also just kind of pop apart, but don't worry, I'm going to show you how to put it back together. So this is what it looks like when it's fully assembled. It has that wire that of course is going all the way to the top. There's no need to pull that all the way out. It has a spring at the top end here, and it has those buttons. Yeah. So you can start pulling this out. There's that spring. And then this is a long track. These buttons are all going to start flying a bit as I pull this. Let's see if I can get a little bit slowly. There we go. There's that track. And then you have all of these buttons. They look like this. They're metal pieces. They have a spring underneath. Yeah. It goes into that hole there. There's actually a little plastic poker on the other end. It'll go into the spring on that side. And all of this can very easily get out of alignment since it's all spring loaded and all sort of simple. Not easily because it's all held within the encapsulating space of the arm, but it is possible that this could have come out of alignment, and that could be a reason why some of these aren't working. Again, also, these metal pieces could potentially have worn down a bit or gotten damaged or something like that. And so this is how you would take it apart if you need to get somebody to manufacture this for you. Shapeways, by the way, does do metal pieces as well, but you would have to have somebody use a program to make the initial sort of blueprint for it if you wanted Shapeways to print it for you. All right. In any case, that's how you take it all apart though, in case you're going to replace any of these pieces or check for misalignment. To put it back together, you're going to take your small springs and they're going to have to go on to these pegs. And there's no way I'm going to get my camera to show these pegs. Just hard to see since everything is black. But it's sort of in the middle. And then it slots in to that little hole. There you go. Then you take this piece and you're going to press them in. Ah, wait. You can deal with that spring afterwards, just don't forget about it. And you're going to start pressing this in to hold that in place as you work your way down. So when you get it all lined up in the track, you can pull it down a little bit and fit that spring into place there. And when that spring's there, all those buttons should then be popped out, and that spring is what the wire is pulling against, which pulls those buttons in and out. Yeah? All right, then we're going to put this back in. This is reassembly again. Just going to press it in and carefully push in our one button. Play whack-a-mole with those holes. And basically just feed the entire system back in until everything is lined up. And at some point you're going to need to press with something else. So one moment there. Using the screwdriver because that thing sits pretty far up in there. There. 1, 2, black button. Flip it upside down. This button didn't pop all the way out, so we're just going to use our screwdriver to get it correctly positioned. All right, now we can start putting the whole thing back together then. All right, so dig out that wire. Usually have a pair of needle nose pliers here. They might be useful as well. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to reattach that wire to this piece. Just goes right into that little well there. And then pulls around. So you have to use a little bit of logic here. There's an angled part here, kind of like a side of a triangle. And this is angled, right? So when you put this all together, these angles are going to have to match up for that button to press. All right, so I'm going to slot this in here, slot this in here. Putting this back together is incredibly fiddly, just to warn you. Okay, I'm going to take that safety button, and those are of course just going to fall right out, but you're going to put them back in place again afterwards. I'm going to reattach that spring on that safety, slot it in, and then I'm going to move back around here. And we're just fitting these into the correct alignment, something like this, yeah? And I'm holding that safety button now because that safety button wants to pop this side out of place. Now, I'm going to take this piece, this is the top end with the Cybex, I'm going to put it under here, and we're going to put these pegs through these holes, and that wire is going to try to get on top of that peg, and if it does, you're going to have to pull that peg out and reposition it. You can see through that hole, because that wire, of course, can't be these wires can't get pinched in there. The pegs have to go around the wires, through those holes. That's incorrect. Backwards. This way. Yeah. Keeping those wires in check. Get it a little bit in place. And then we're going to line these up. And on this side at the bottom there's like a rectangular peg, and when you get it correct it's going to slot right into a groove on this this Cybex piece, and then all of a sudden everything's just going to snap correctly in place. It's very strange. So you need to hold that trigger and you need to hold these pieces, and then when everything's correctly lined up you'll feel that it all just kind of snaps correctly into place. Same is going to happen with this piece now. This is the side for the safety. Looks like this. And put it on top. And provided everything has lined up correctly, it hasn't, it'll snap in place. So find out what is at an angle. Ah, this piece. All right, so wherever that peg from the safety is pressing in, like whether it's more to this side or more to this side, that's where this side goes. So I'm going to push this in so that these little lips are on the inside of that mechanism. There. Hold it together and it all just snaps seamlessly into place. If it doesn't snap seamlessly into place, do not force it. Take it apart, find what is not aligned, put it back together properly. Because getting frustrated and forcing things with this mechanism will result in you breaking something. All right, screwing this back into place. It is possible to screw too much, so stop before you do so. All right, moving on with the reassembly back to the main body of the chassis. I'm just going to take this, slot it in, and then there are several elements to this now. There's that pipe, there's this pipe, and then there's these components on top. And when you look down through those holes where the screws go, you gotta get it all lined up correctly. You can start just with the center one, makes the rest of it a lot easier. So get it lined up correctly, slot your screw in. There you go. I'm gonna do this loosely, but you just screw your bolt in tight, of course. Then this other one goes in. Screw it in nice and tight so it's flush. And we're going to pop this plate back in place. 2 teeth on top, bottom one. Then, of course, with that Cybex logo upwards, pull in the safety slider, pull in the main button, and slot your handle all the way through. And then last is those plugs. 2 feet on one side, not on the other side. The 2 feet aim towards the center of the chassis. Pop it in, push in those buttons. Make sure those buttons are pressed in properly and just lock it in place. One more time. Slotting it in, feet facing inwards, press in tight on those buttons. Don't be too afraid of pinching your fingers, I suppose, and slap it into place. There you go. All right, then it's all reassembled. You can just, of course, double check that everything works. Get your various handle positions, push it all the way in. Back frame loosens, 2 positions, and so on. In any case, that was our disassembly of the telescopic handle related mechanisms on the Cybex Priam, as well as the folding mechanism, with an interest towards fixing problems with that telescopic mechanism or with the rear frame. We hope this video was useful to you, and if it was, we ask you subscribe as it helps us continue making videos in the future. Thank you.